You have 24 hours to remove the feeder, or the fine doubles every single day. That's what she said to my face on my own porch on a Tuesday morning over a $12 bird feeder shaped like a little red barn. My name is Dana Whitfield, and 8 months ago I didn't know a single thing about homeowners associations. I thought an HOA was just the group that mowed the median strip and put up the Welcome to Willow Creek Estates sign every spring. I was wrong, dead wrong. Willow Creek Estates is the kind of subdivision you see in real estate brochures. 42 houses, cul-de-sacs curling like ribbon, a community pool that opens Memorial Day weekend sharp, and lawns so uniform you'd think someone used a stencil. I bought my house there 3 years ago. Beige siding, black shutters, a maple tree out front that I planted myself the week I moved in. It was my first house. I was proud of it. My neighbor 2 doors down was Regina Hastings. Regina had been HOA president for 6 years running, and everybody on the block called her the mayor behind her back, half joke, half warning. She had a clipboard, she had a tape measure. She had opinions about the exact shade of white that was acceptable for a mailbox post, and she was not shy about sharing them. I liked birds. That's the whole embarrassing truth of how this started. My grandmother used to keep a feeder on her back porch in Ohio, and after she passed, I wanted something small to remember her by. So in March, I hung a little red barn-shaped feeder from a shepherd's hook, 6 feet from my back door, filled it with black oil sunflower seed, and went back to my normal life. Within a week, I had cardinals. Within 2 weeks, I had a pair of goldfinches that came at the same time every morning like they had an alarm clock. It made my coffee taste better, honestly. It was the most peaceful part of my day. I did not know that peaceful mornings and Regina Hastings could not coexist on the same street. The first note came on a Thursday. It was slid into my mailbox, no envelope, just folded once, HOA letterhead at the top. Notice of alleged violation, wildlife attractant on private property, section 4, 3C. I read it twice standing in my driveway in my socks. It cited a rule I had never once seen in the 60-page HOA handbook I'd skimmed when I bought the house. It said bird feeders may attract nuisance wildlife including rodents and are subject to board review. I laughed. I actually laughed out loud alone in my driveway. A $12 bird feeder was now a board matter. I didn't take it down. I figured it was a formality, some overzealous paperwork that would sort itself out. I was wrong about that too. 10 days later, Regina herself showed up at my door, not a note this time, her clipboard in hand, sunglasses pushed up into her hair, standing on my welcome mat like she owned it. Dana, she said, I need you to understand this is not personal, but that feeder is a liability for every homeowner on this street. It's dropping seed hulls onto the sidewalk. It's going to bring in mice, and frankly, it makes the property look unkempt. I asked her calmly to show me exactly where in the covenants a bird feeder was prohibited. She tapped her clipboard and said the board had interpretive authority over what counted as a nuisance, and that interpretation had just been made. That was the first time I understood I wasn't dealing with a rule. I was dealing with a mood. I asked one simple question. Regina, has anyone actually complained, or is this just you? She didn't answer that. She just said the fine would start at $50 a week if the feeder was still up by Friday, and that it would double if I ignored a second notice. Then she turned around and walked back to her house like she'd just delivered a weather report. That night, I did something I probably should have done in March. I read the entire HOA governing document, all 61 pages twice. Section 4. 3 covered attractive nuisances, and it listed exactly 4 things: unsecured pools, abandoned vehicles, open trash containers, and standing water. A bird feeder appeared nowhere, not once. I took a photo of that page and saved it. Friday came, I left the feeder up. Saturday morning, there was a second notice in my mailbox, this one with a number on it. $100 due within 15 days per violation of Section 4. 3C as determined by the Architectural Review Board. I remember standing at my kitchen counter reading that word, determined, like it was a court ruling instead of one woman's clipboard. That's when my neighbor Carl, from 3 houses down, knocked on my door holding his own folded piece of HOA letterhead. His was about a basketball hoop that had been in his driveway for 4 years, completely unsighted until the week after his son beat Regina's nephew in a driveway one-on-one game at a block party. She's not just coming for you, Carl said. She's been doing this for years. People just pay the fine because it's easier than fighting her. That was the moment the $12 bird feeder stopped being about a bird feeder. I started asking around, quietly at first, then not so quietly. Within a week, I had 5 separate stories from 5 separate houses. The Alversons had been fined for a non-compliant flagpole that was 2 inches taller than a pole Regina's own husband had installed the year before. The Ray's family had been threatened with a lien over a wheelchair ramp before a lawyer friend of theirs made one phone call and the threat evaporated overnight. An elderly widow on Larkspur Court, Mrs. Denny, had been sent 3 notices in one summer about a garden gnome collection Regina called visual clutter, while Regina's own front yard had a 6-foot decorative windmill nobody had ever questioned. Every single story had the same shape, an obscure rule invoked selectively enforced only against people who'd never push back. I realized I wasn't the first target. I was just the loudest one so far, and I hadn't even said anything yet. I called the county the following Monday, not a lawyer, just the county clerk's office, to ask a simple question. Does a homeowners association actually have legal authority to fine someone for something that isn't written in their own governing documents? The woman on the phone paused and said, "That would depend on the covenants, but generally no, a board can't create new restrictions on the fly and call it interpretation. That's usually a due process problem." Due process. I wrote that phrase down on a sticky note and put it on my fridge. I emailed the HOA's management company, the outside firm that technically administered Willow Creek's finances and filings, and asked for the specific board minutes where wildlife attractant enforcement against bird feeders had been formally voted on and adopted. I attached a photo of Section 4.3 for reference. I asked for a response within 10 business days in writing. 3 days later, the second fine notice arrived. $200 now, compounding weekly per prior notice, and this time it included a threat I hadn't seen before. Continued noncompliance could result in a lien being filed against my property. A lien over sunflower seed and a red tin barn shaped like something out of a children's book. I sat at my kitchen table that night with the notice in one hand and my phone in the other, and for the first time since this started, I genuinely didn't know if I was going to win. 4 days after that, a certified letter arrived, the kind you have to sign for at the door. It wasn't from Regina directly. It was from an attorney representing the HOA's management company, a name I didn't recognize on letterhead I'd never seen, informing me that continued noncompliance may result in the association pursuing collection action, including but not limited to a lien filing and recovery of legal fees. I stood on my porch holding it, the mail carrier's truck still idling at the curb, and I remember thinking quite clearly that a woman with a clipboard had somehow turned a bird feeder into something with a law firm attached to it. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept doing the math in my head, $50, then $100, then $200, compounding weekly, plus legal fees on top of a fine for a rule that, as far as I could tell, didn't even exist. I texted Carl at 11 p.m. just to ask if this was normal. He sent back one word, constantly, then a second message, nobody ever pushes back far enough to find out if she's bluffing. I read that twice. I decided I was going to find out. The next morning changed everything, though I didn't know it yet when I woke up. I got an email back from the management company, not the answer I expected. The compliance coordinator, a woman named Priya who clearly had no personal stake in any of this, wrote back that after reviewing the file, she could find no record of a board vote amending Section 4.3 to include bird feeders, and that she was escalating this internally for review. Attached to her email, almost as an afterthought, was a PDF of the full board meeting minutes from the past 18 months. I opened it expecting nothing. What I found took my breath away. Buried in the minutes from a meeting 9 months earlier was a single line: a motion to add bird feeders and similar wildlife attractants to Section 4.3 had been proposed by Regina Hastings, seconded by no one, and the motion had failed for lack of a second, meaning it was never adopted. It was never a rule. She had tried to make it one, been voted down by her own silence-filled board, and then enforced it anyway on me as if the vote had gone the other way. I read it 4 times to make sure I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't. I printed 3 things. The failed motion from the minutes, the unedited Section 4.3 with its 4 listed nuisances, and the county clerk's comment about due process, which I'd turned into a short written statement. I asked her to email me for the record, which she did. I put all 3 in a folder. Then I called an actual attorney, a real estate lawyer named Marcus who specialized in HOA disputes and paid for 1 hour of his time. He read everything in about 4 minutes and said one sentence I will never forget. "This isn't a violation. This is a fabricated violation, and fabricated fines are the one thing that gets an HOA board personally, not just organizationally, exposed." I requested, in writing, an emergency hearing before the full board, citing the association's own bylaws, which required one within 15 days of a written request from any homeowner disputing a fine over $100. Regina couldn't deny the hearing. It was in the same 61-page document she'd been waving at me for weeks. The hearing was held in the clubhouse by the community pool, folding chairs, a card table, 5 board members, and Regina at the head with her clipboard like always. Word had gotten around the neighborhood though, and by the time I walked in, Carl was there. The Alversons were there. Mrs. Denny from Larkspur Court was there in a folding chair with her cane across her lap. Nobody had asked them to come, they came anyway. I laid the folder on the table. I read the failed motion out loud, word for word, the one where her own proposal had died for lack of a second. I read section 4.3 out loud, all 4 listed nuisances, none of them a bird feeder. I read the compliance coordinator's email out loud, the one saying there was no adopted rule on file. Regina's face did something I hadn't seen it do in 8 months. It went still. This was a discussion item, she said. I was operating under the assumption it had passed. It's in your own minutes that it didn't, I said. You wrote the motion, you know what a failed second means. One of the other board members, a quiet man named Harold who I don't think had said 10 words to me in 3 years, leaned toward the table and asked her directly, Regina, how many other notices have gone out citing rules that were never actually adopted? Nobody answered that question out loud that night, but I watched 2 other board members start flipping through their own copies of the minutes like they were seeing them for the first time. Then Mrs. Denny stood up, cane and all, and told the whole room about her gnomes and Regina's windmill, in front of everyone, no notes, just memory and years of quiet resentment finally finding a microphone. Carl told his story about the basketball hoop. The Alversons told theirs about the flagpole. One by one, without me asking a single one of them to speak, they laid out a pattern that had been operating in plain sight for years. And for the first time, an actual board, not just angry neighbors on a drive, was hearing all of it in the same room at the same time. The board voted that night 4-1 to rescind both fine notices against me in full, to formally strike the never-adopted bird feeder language from consideration entirely, and to open a broader review of every fine issued under Section 4.3 for the past 3 years. Regina was the one vote against her own reversal. What happened after that moved faster than I expected. A local news producer, tipped off by, of all people, Carl's daughter who'd posted about the meeting online, called me 2 weeks later asking if I'd be willing to talk on camera about an HOA bird feeder dispute that turned into a neighborhood reckoning. I said yes, mostly because I wanted the story told straight, not exaggerated. The segment aired on a Thursday evening. It ran 3 minutes. It showed my back porch, the little red barn feeder still hanging exactly where I'd hung it in March, cardinals and all, and it closed with Priya's email line on screen, no adopted rule on file. By that weekend, the story had been picked up by 2 other regional stations and a handful of online outlets that cover consumer and homeowner rights. The comments were full of people from other subdivisions across the country telling nearly identical stories: fabricated rules, selective enforcement, fines that conveniently landed on the neighbors least likely to fight back. Willow Creek Estates, a name most people outside our zip code had never heard, was suddenly the example people pointed to. Regina resigned from the board 11 days after the hearing. Not fired, not voted out formally, just gone, a 1-paragraph letter read at the next meeting citing personal reasons. Harold was elected interim president the same night, and one of his first actions was mailing every homeowner a full audit of fines issued over 3 years, with instructions on how to formally appeal any of them. 14 households did. 9 fines were reversed within the month, including the lien threat against the Ray's family's wheelchair ramp 3 years after the fact, with a written apology attached. Mrs. Denny told me weeks later over a plate of lemon bars she brought to my porch unannounced that she hadn't spoken at an HOA meeting in 11 years because the first time she tried back when her husband was still alive, Regina had cut her off mid-sentence and moved to the next agenda item. I just needed somebody else to go first, she told me. So I knew it was safe. That sentence stuck with me longer than almost anything else that happened that whole year. It wasn't really about a feeder or a windmill or a flagpole 2 inches too tall. It was about 11 years of people deciding it was easier to stay quiet. My feeder is still hanging off that shepherd's hook 6 feet from my back door. The goldfinches came back this spring like they always do, right on schedule like they never left. I still make coffee out there most mornings. And some mornings Carl comes over with his own mug, and we just watch the birds and don't talk about HOA business at all, which honestly might be the nicest part of how this whole thing ended. I used to think an HOA was just a group of neighbors keeping the lawns tidy. I know better now. The rules only have power if nobody reads them, and the people enforcing them only have power if nobody asks to see the minutes. One folded notice in my mailbox over a $12 feeder turned into 9 reversed fines, a resigned board president, and a neighborhood that finally started showing up to its own meetings. If you've ever gotten one of those notices, the kind that cites a rule you've never seen written down anywhere, do what I did. Ask for the minutes. Ask for the vote. You might be surprised what you find, or rather, what was never actually there to begin with. If this story felt familiar, you already know why I'm telling it. Drop your own HOA story in the comments. I read every single one, and if you want to hear what happened with the wheelchair ramp Leon in full, that one deserves its own video. Subscribe if you want to be there when I tell it.